Regardless of how one feels about value added, I think it's going to be here for a long time, and it's important that we have people studying it, try to understand it, and understand the pros and cons of the approach. Teacher quality, I guess, is something I've long been interested in. My mother was an elementary school teacher, and so I was sort of raised with a better understanding of what life is like for a classroom teacher. And in my dissertation work as an economics PhD student, I studied long-run trends in teacher quality, and this was not that long ago, but before the days of value added. And teacher quality has long been a concern, and only recently have people been working so hard to try to quantify it in some way. I teach economics of education at NYU, and a lot of that has to do with teacher labor markets. I'm also interested in things like school finance and school choice. Value added is sort of designed to rank teachers and look at relative teacher quality, and so it can't say much about the level of teaching effectiveness in the system, but it is designed to try to differentiate between teachers of higher and low ability. In the abstract, value added sounds like a great deal. It's an attempt to identify what it is that teachers are bringing to the classroom and ultimately to our students' achievement, and that's something that it's hard to argue with. But value added systems, at the current state of technology, I don't think they're ready for prime time. There are a lot of flaws with a value added system that could easily be fixed. Some of these test related issues could be fixed with a better test or more testing, better accounting for students. But there are also a lot of intractable problems that I think are not easily solved by simply more testing or better testing. Sort of issues of separating teachers' effects from other effects. These are not things that I think can be easily resolved with just a better statistical model, and so I think without a lot more work or some fundamental rethinking of how we evaluate teachers, that these models are probably not ready for high stakes prime time. And teachers do vary in their ability to raise student outcomes, and I think value added is just one attempt to try to quantify that and try to find a way to sort of identify who the really high performing and low performing teachers are. I have a number of concerns about value added, and I guess I'd put them into a couple of categories. One would be sort of test related issues. So are tests really up to the task of estimating the value added of teachers? So are the tests really good enough for what we're asking of them? Value added systems are based entirely on standardized tests, and there are good standardized tests and bad standardized tests. And so we need to take a closer look at those tests to see whether they really can be used to evaluate teachers in a holistic and meaningful way. Sort of by necessity, standardized tests can really only capture a subset of the skills that we want kids to be able to acquire while they're in school. So to the extent that we rely on value added to evaluate teachers, we ignore sort of a substantial fraction of the skills and knowledge that we expect them to cultivate in their own students. So the test itself is a big area of concern for me. The second is really kind of more of a statistical issue, and that's whether or not you can actually use test scores to infer the effectiveness of teachers. So there are a lot of things that come into play that influence a student's educational success. So one would be their family input, so things that are happening in the home. Another things that are happening in the community, or things that are happening in the school level, things that are happening with their friends, and so on. And so a value-added method is seeking to separate the effects of all of these other influences on student outcomes from the teacher, and to really just nail down what exactly the teacher is contributing that can't be explained by anything else in the past or present. That's a really big challenge, and there's been a lot of research that finds that the value-added methods may not be up to the task. They're influenced a lot by things that happen at the school level, say the principal. Your colleagues can have a big influence on you as a teacher, whether or not you're effective. And so if we rely on value-added methods to assess teachers, we might be sort of falsely attributing the impact of other influences to the teacher herself. Another big issue is sort of the concern about who counts under a value-added system. So not all teachers are teaching tested subjects. Not all subjects are tested. And not all students count towards a teacher's value-added measure. So value-added is really based on students' changes in test scores from one year to the next. And So if a student is not present in the prior year, that student doesn't count for that teacher's evaluation. And in certain districts, like my own home district of New York City and other big urban districts around the country, students are highly mobile. They're coming and going all the time. That in some cases, teachers may have a large fraction of students that just weren't present the prior year. And a value-added system of evaluation would ignore those kids altogether. And I don't think that's the purpose of or the hopes of a good evaluation system for teachers. And a fourth issue, I guess, is the issue of precision and stability of these. These are the value-added measures are really estimates. They're statistical estimates of teachers' effectiveness. And there's a big margin of error around these. So to the extent that we have uncertainty about whether or not a student's achievement is due to the teacher or some other outside influence, there's going to be a margin of error. And from some work that I've done and others have done, the margin of error around teachers' effectiveness measures tends to be very large, meaning that for the vast majority of teachers, it's hard to differentiate one teacher from another. We might be able to identify some of the most high-flying teachers, or perhaps some of the lowest performing teachers, but the system doesn't provide a lot of information for really the vast majority of teachers in the system. And I guess related to that concern, the measures aren't very stable from year to year. So there is a lot of uncertainty in these estimates, and so from one year to the next, a teacher's value added may fluctuate wildly up and down. And these really aren't due to real changes in the teacher's effectiveness, but rather things that are happening around that teacher. So teachers matter a lot. So don't get me wrong; teachers play a big role in student outcomes. But the bulk of the variation in student achievement is coming from a lot of these outside factors, from families, from schools, from just so idiosyncratic things that are happening on the day of the test, and those things tend to dominate the actual teacher effectiveness measure. How well can value-added systems factor out these other influences? They do the best they can, and it varies from one district to the next. They always look at prior achievement. That's really a big predictor of how students are doing this year, is how they did last year. There's a basic set of poverty measures and other characteristics of students that are used to make predictions about how they might do. But they're pretty limited. There's certainly a lot of things that aren't accounted for in these models, and that has to do with the sort of instability of these value-added estimates and the uncertainty. The average margin of error for a single year of teacher value-added measures was about 60 percentile points, meaning that one might not know whether I guess the range of possible estimates for a teacher's effectiveness might be, say, from the 30th percentile up to the 80th percentile, say. That's a 50-point margin of error. Even if you add additional years of data, say if you have 3 years of classroom results for a teacher, the margin of error is still around 30 to 35 percentage points. And so it's with margin of error that wide, it's really hard to distinguish teachers from one another. So does this make sense to use value-added measures when there is such a large margin of error around those? It's possible that they could provide some information, and I think what the research has shown is that you might learn something perhaps about the teachers who are persistently at the very top, or those teachers that are persistently at the very bottom. But that's a very small percentage of teachers, and so for the vast majority of teachers in the middle, we don't really learn a lot from a value-added measure with a large margin of error. And so high-stakes decisions wouldn't make a lot of sense for the vast majority of teachers. You wouldn't want to put a lot of weight on a score like that with that large of a margin of error alone. So you certainly wouldn't want careers to end based on a single measure like this. And as of right now, we really don't have a lot of evidence on how value-added systems really affect the supply of teachers, whether this is something that new teachers are attracted to, or potentially high-quality teachers are attracted to or not. We talked a little bit about margin of error and the fact that the value-added measures are unstable from one year to the next. This, in some sense, puts a lot of randomness in the process. And so while most workers would like to be rewarded for a job well done, The value-added measures have a lot of variability in them, and so they can vary a lot from one year to the next. And so you can get rewarded in one year, and the next year be told that you're an ineffective teacher. I'm not sure what kind of an effect that would have on me as a potential teacher, knowing there's that kind of risk associated with my assessment. So that really remains to be seen about what the long-run impact of these measures on recruiting. Various forms of school accountability can provide different answers. So in many cases, the federal accountability program, No Child Left Behind, with its requirements for schools to make annual yearly progress, can oftentimes butt up against a state accountability program that may identify a different set of schools as failing schools than the federal program. There's really a corollary in teacher value-added measures, and so one of the things that I've seen in my research is that a teacher's value-added can vary a lot depending on the test that's given. So even if you just change the test that's administered to the same set of kids in the same subject, different sets of teachers will be identified as high-quality or low-quality teachers. And in some ways, that's the equivalent of the school accountability dilemma, that really depending on the measure that one uses or the statistical model that one applies, there may be different winners and different losers. And really reasonable people can disagree about the model that's used or the test that's used. And so someone has to sort of step in and reconcile these two conflicting sets of results. And it's not clear that can be easily done. With teachers, the biggest problem, as I've mentioned, is issues around large margins of error, instability, sort of not counting a substantial fraction of students towards the teacher's value-added measure. A lot of that boils down to the fact that we only observe teachers with one class a year with, say, 20 to 30 students. And so maybe over a couple of years, we'll only observe that teacher with 60 to 90 students. Schools are much bigger samples, and I think we can provide much better evidence at the school level of what's their contribution to student achievement than we can at individual teacher level. That's up for debate. I haven't seen convincing school value-added models any more than I've seen convincing teacher value-added models for practice.